The sound of the church bell echoed across the high desert plains of Montana Territory in 1878, and Marcus Garrett reined in his horse at the edge of Lewiston, wondering if he had finally lost his mind after 3 months alone on the cattle trail. He had been riding since dawn, pushing hard to reach the next town before nightfall, when that sound stopped him cold. It was not the melody itself that arrested him, though it rang clear and true across the sprawling landscape of sagebrush and rolling hills. Rather, it was something in the rhythm, a deliberate cadence that spoke of devotion and duty, of someone who cared enough to ring that bell with intention rather than obligation. Marcus had spent the last 5 years drifting from ranch to ranch, town to town, never staying anywhere long enough to call it home. At 26, he had convinced himself that rootless was the only way for a man like him, a man whose father had drunk himself to death, and whose mother had died of a broken heart shortly after. But something in that bell's song called to a part of him he thought had died alongside them. The town itself was modest, a collection of wooden structures lining a single main street with a few side roads branching off like the ribs of some great beast. The church sat at the far end, a white painted building with a simple steeple, and as Marcus urged his bay gelding forward, he could see a figure in the bell tower. Even from a distance, he could make out the slender form of a woman, her arms working the rope with a steady, practiced motion. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, and in that light she seemed almost ethereal. Marcus had not meant to stop in Lewiston at all. He had been heading north toward the big ranches near Great Falls, where he had heard they were hiring men for the winter. But his horse needed rest, and if he was being honest with himself, so did he. 3 months of pushing cattle, sleeping on hard ground, and eating nothing but beans and hardtack had worn him down more than he cared to admit. A hot meal and a real bed would do him good, even if only for a night. He guided his horse toward the livery stable, a weathered building with a faded sign that proclaimed it to be run by one Samuel Richardson. A young boy, no more than 12, emerged from the shadows as Marcus dismounted. "Help you, mister?" The boy asked, his eyes taking in Marcus's dusty clothes and the well-worn saddle. "Need to board my horse for the night, maybe longer, depending." Marcus handed over the reins and fished a silver dollar from his pocket. "He needs a good rub-down and extra oats if you have them. He has earned it." The boy's eyes widened at the coin. "Yes, sir. I will take real good care of him." As the boy led the horse away, Marcus became aware that the bell had stopped ringing. The silence felt almost profound after the steady rhythm that had drawn him into town. He shouldered his saddlebags and rifle, then made his way back toward the main street, looking for the boarding house he had spotted on his way in. The Lewiston boarding house was run by a formidable woman named Mrs. Adelaide Patterson, who looked Marcus up and down with the practiced eye of someone who had seen every kind of drifter and cowboy the frontier had to offer. $3 a week, meals included, she said, her arms crossed over her ample bosom. No drinking, no gambling, and absolutely no women in the rooms. You break my rules, you are out on your ear. Understood? Yes, madam, Marcus said, managing not to smile at her stern demeanor. He liked her immediately. There was something refreshing about a woman who said exactly what she meant. "Room 4, top of the stairs on the left. Supper is at 6. You are late, but I will warm you a plate since it is your first night." Her expression softened slightly. "You look like you could use a decent meal." "Thank you, madam, I appreciate that." Marcus climbed the narrow stairs and found his room, a small but clean space with a bed, a washstand, and a single window overlooking the street. He dropped his belongings on the floor and poured water from the pitcher into the basin, scrubbing away as much of the trail dust as he could. His reflection in the small mirror showed a man he barely recognized anymore. His dark hair had grown long, curling over his collar, and his face was deeply tanned from months in the sun. His eyes, though, those were what gave him pause. They looked tired, older than his 26 years. The church bell began to ring again, and Marcus found himself drawn to the window. From this vantage point, he could see the church more clearly, and this time he watched as the woman emerged from the building. She wore a simple blue dress that the wind pressed against her frame, and even from this distance, he could see the care with which she locked the church door and tested it to make sure it was secure. There was something in the way she moved, a quiet confidence that spoke of someone who knew exactly who she was and what she was meant to do. Marcus shook his head, wondering at his own thoughts. He had seen plenty of women in his travels, had even courted a few when he was younger and more optimistic about the possibility of a settled life. But none had ever made him stop and stare like some green boy with his first crush. He turned from the window and headed downstairs, where Mrs. Patterson had indeed kept a plate warm for him. The dining room was empty at this late hour, and Marcus ate in solitude, savoring every bite of the roast beef, potatoes, and carrots that Mrs. Patterson set before him. It was the best meal he had eaten in months, and he told her so, earning himself a pleased smile. "You are a cowboy, I take it?" she asked, refilling his coffee cup. "Yes, madam. Been working cattle drives mostly, but I am looking for something more permanent. Heard they might be hiring up near Great Falls." Might be. But we have ranches around here too, you know. The Whitmore spread is always looking for good hands, and old Henry does not work his men to death like some of the bigger operations do. She paused, studying him with those sharp eyes. "You look like a man who could use a place to settle down." Marcus took a sip of his coffee, considering his response. "Maybe. I have been moving around for a while now." "Well, you think on it. Lewiston is a good town, quiet mostly. We have got good people here." She bustled back toward the kitchen, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts. After finishing his meal, Marcus stepped outside onto the porch, enjoying the cool evening air. The street was quiet, most folks having retired to their homes for the night. A few lights glowed in windows, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked. It was peaceful in a way that made Marcus's chest ache with something he could not quite name. He was about to turn back inside when he saw her walking down the street, a basket over her arm. She was heading toward a small house at the edge of town, and in the fading light he could see her face more clearly now. She was young, probably early 20s, with dark hair pulled back in a simple bun and delicate features that were nevertheless strong in their own way. There was purpose in her stride, and when she glanced up and caught him watching, she did not look away or blush like some women might have. Instead, she offered a small nod of acknowledgement, a gesture that was neither welcoming nor dismissive, simply polite. Marcus found himself nodding back, then felt foolish for standing there like a statue. He went inside and climbed the stairs to his room, determined to put the mysterious bell ringer out of his mind. He had learned long ago not to let himself get attached to places or people. It only led to pain when it was time to move on, and it was always time to move on. But sleep did not come easily that night. He lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of the town settling in for the night, and found his thoughts returning again and again to that steady, faithful ringing of the church bell. There had been something in it, something that spoke to a hunger he had been trying to ignore for years. The hunger for purpose, for meaning, for a place where he belonged. Morning came bright and clear, and Marcus woke to the sound of activity on the street below. He dressed and made his way downstairs, where Mrs. Patterson had laid out a breakfast of eggs, bacon, and fresh bread that made his mouth water. "Sleep well?" she asked as he took his seat at the long table, this time joined by 3 other boarders: an older man who worked at the general store, a middle-aged woman who was a seamstress, and a young clerk from the land office. "Very well, thank you," Marcus said, though it was not entirely true. "You planning to stay on a while, or are you heading out today?" Mrs. Patterson asked as she poured coffee all around. "I thought I might look around town today, see what is what, maybe ride out to that ranch you mentioned. The Whitmore place, that is a good idea. Henry is usually in town on Saturday mornings, does his business at the bank and the feed store. You might catch him if you head over there after breakfast." As if on cue, the church bell began to ring, marking the hour. The sound filled the room, and Marcus saw the other boarders barely react, so accustomed were they to its presence. But he felt that same pull, that same inexplicable connection to whoever was up in that tower, faithfully performing their duty. "That would be Miss Judith Wilson," the seamstress said, noticing Marcus's attention. "She has been ringing that bell every morning and evening for 3 years now, ever since she came to Lewiston." "Is she the preacher's daughter?" Marcus asked, trying to sound casual. "No, no. She is just a member of the congregation, but a devoted one. Her father passed away back east somewhere, and she came out here to live with her aunt. Been taking care of the church ever since, ringing the bell, cleaning, arranging the flowers, that sort of thing." The seamstress, who introduced herself as Mrs. Helen Montgomery, leaned forward conspiratorially. "Some folks thought she might end up marrying the preacher, Reverend Thomas, but he is 15 years her senior and already had his heart set on the schoolteacher. They married last year." "Helen, do not go gossiping about people at my breakfast table," Mrs. Patterson said, though there was no real heat in her words. "It is not gossip if it is true," Helen replied with a sniff. Marcus finished his breakfast and thanked Mrs. Patterson for the meal, then headed out into the morning sunshine. Lewiston looked different in the daylight, more substantial somehow. He could see now that it was a prosperous little town, with well-maintained buildings and signs of growth. There was a new hotel going up on the corner, and the general store's windows were full of goods. He made his way toward the feed store, figuring that was as good a place as any to find Henry Whitmore. Sure enough, he found a weathered rancher in his 50s examining a shipment of seed, his critical eye taking in every detail. "Mr. Whitmore." Marcus approached with his hat in his hands, a gesture of respect that his father, for all his faults, had taught him. The rancher turned, his blue eyes sharp and assessing. "That is right. What can I do for you? Name is Marcus Garrett. I am a cowhand, been working drives for the last few years, and I am looking for something more permanent. Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house said you might be hiring." Whitmore looked him over, taking in the calloused hands and the honest wear on his clothes. "You any good with horses?" "Yes, sir. I can break them, train them, doctor them if need be. I am good with cattle too, and I am not afraid of hard work." "You drink?" "Not to excess, sir." "You got a temper?" "No, sir. I keep my head even when things go wrong." Whitmore was quiet for a moment, still studying him. Finally, he nodded. "I could use another hand. My foreman is getting up in years, and I need someone who can take on more responsibility. Pay is $30 a month plus room and board. You would be staying in the bunkhouse with the other hands. We work 6 days a week, Sundays off unless there is an emergency." "Sound fair?" "More than fair, sir. When do you want me to start?" "Monday morning." Ranch is about 5 miles west of town. Follow the main road and you will see the gate. Be there at dawn." Whitmore extended his hand and Marcus shook it, feeling something settle in his chest. It was not much, but it was a start. With his immediate future secured, Marcus spent the rest of the morning exploring Lewiston. He stopped by the general store to pick up some supplies, including new work gloves and a couple of shirts. The owner, a friendly man named Mr. Cooper, was happy to fill him in on the town's history while he rang up the purchases. "Been here since the beginning, I have," Cooper said proudly. "Lewiston started as a trading post back in '62, grew from there. We have got about 300 souls now, good mix of families and businesses. The railroad talks about coming through here, though I will believe it when I see it." Marcus was heading back toward the boarding house when he heard raised voices from the direction of the church. Curiosity got the better of him, and he walked that way, rounding the corner to find Judith Wilson facing down three rough-looking men who appeared to be drunk despite the early hour. "I told you, the church is closed until Sunday service," Judith was saying, her voice firm but not unkind. "If you need help, I can direct you to Reverend Thomas's house." "We do not need no preacher," one of the men slurred. "Just wanted to see inside. Heard churches sometimes got silver and such." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. He stepped forward, his hand resting casually on the revolver at his hip. "The lady asked you to move along. I suggest you do that." The three men turned, and Marcus could see them weighing their options. They were drunk and probably desperate, but they were not stupid. 3 against 1 might have been good odds if Marcus had looked like an easy mark, but something in his stance and the steadiness of his gaze made them reconsider. "No trouble here," the second man said, raising his hands. "We was just leaving." They shuffled off down the street, and Marcus watched until they turned the corner and disappeared. Only then did he turn to Judith, who was watching him with an unreadable expression. "Thank you," she said simply, "though I have handled worse." "I do not doubt it," Marcus said, meaning it. Up close, she was even lovelier than he had thought, but it was her eyes that caught him. They were a deep brown, warm but also guarded, as if she had learned to be careful about who she let in. "Marcus Garrett, I am new in town. Judith Wilson." She extended her hand, and when he shook it, he noticed the calluses that spoke of hard work. "You are staying at Mrs. Patterson's?" "I am. Just hired on with Henry Whitmore too, so I will be around for a while." Something flickered in her eyes, though whether it was pleasure or concern he could not tell. "Mr. Whitmore is a good man to work for. He treats his people fairly." "That is what I hear." Marcus hesitated, then asked, "The bell ringing, that is your doing?" She nodded, a small smile touching her lips. "Every morning and evening, unless I am ill or away. It is important that people hear it, know that the church is here, that they are not alone." The smile faded, replaced by something more serious. "I know some folks think it is silly, a woman spending so much time on such a simple thing, but it matters to me." "It is not silly," Marcus said, and he was surprised by the intensity in his own voice. "I was miles away yesterday evening when I heard it. It made me think, maybe stop running for a change." Judith's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment they simply stood there, the morning sun warm on their faces and something unspoken passing between them. Then she seemed to collect herself, stepping back slightly. "Well, I should be going. I have cleaning to do inside and the flowers need changing." She paused. "Thank you again for your help, Mr. Garrett. Just Marcus, please, and it was no trouble." He watched as she unlocked the church door and disappeared inside, then stood there for longer than was probably appropriate, wondering what had just happened. He had met plenty of women in his life, but none who had made him feel quite like this, as if he had been sleepwalking through the world and was only now beginning to wake up. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Marcus bought a few more supplies, got a haircut and a shave at the barber shop, and spent some time at the livery checking on his horse. The boy from yesterday, whose name turned out to be Timothy, had done an excellent job, and the bay looked rested and content. That evening, Marcus was sitting on the porch of the boarding house when the bell began to ring again, that same steady, faithful rhythm. He closed his eyes and listened, trying to understand what it was about the sound that moved him so deeply. Perhaps it was simply that it represented everything he had been missing: consistency, purpose, a connection to something larger than himself. Sunday morning arrived, and Marcus found himself putting on his cleanest shirt and brushing the dust from his good pants. He told himself he was just being respectful, that it was proper to attend church when you were new in town. But he knew the real reason. He wanted to see her again, to hear her voice, to understand why this woman he barely knew had taken up residence in his thoughts so completely. The church was nearly full when he arrived, families filling the pews and greeting each other with the easy familiarity of people who had known each other for years. Marcus slipped into a back pew, feeling conspicuous and out of place, but when Judith entered from the side door carrying an armful of wildflowers, she caught his eye and smiled. It was a small thing, barely there and gone again, but it made him feel as if he belonged. Reverend Thomas was a good preacher, his sermon about faith and perseverance resonating with Marcus in ways he had not expected. But if he was being honest, he spent more time watching Judith, who sat in the front row with an older woman who must have been her aunt. She sang the hymns with a clear, strong voice, and when it came time for the offering, she helped pass the plate with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything. After the service, people lingered outside the church, talking and laughing in the sunshine. Marcus was about to slip away when Mrs. Patterson caught his arm. "Come meet some people," she said, brooking no argument. "No sense being a stranger when you are going to be living here." She introduced him to what felt like half the town: the blacksmith and his wife, the doctor, the owner of the hotel, the postmaster. Everyone was friendly, welcoming even, and Marcus found himself thinking that maybe, just maybe, he could make a home here. "And this is Judith Wilson and her aunt, Margaret Wilson," Mrs. Patterson said, bringing him face to face with the woman who had occupied so many of his thoughts. "Judith, this is Marcus Garrett. He is the new hand at the Whitmore Ranch." "We met the other day," Judith said, and Marcus was pleased to see a faint blush color her cheeks. "He helped me with some trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Margaret Wilson was a small woman with sharp eyes that reminded Marcus of a bird. "Nothing serious, Aunt Margaret. Just some men who had too much to drink." Margaret's expression hardened. "Those drifters again. Sheriff needs to run them out of town before they cause real problems." "Now, Margaret, let's not ruin a nice Sunday with such talk," Mrs. Patterson said diplomatically. She turned to Marcus. "Will you be joining us for Sunday dinner? I always make extra on Sundays, and the Wilsons are coming." Marcus found himself accepting before he had fully thought it through, and when Judith's eyes met his, he saw something there that might have been pleasure. The dinner was a lively affair, with Mrs. Patterson's dining room full of her regular boarders plus the Wilsons and a few other church members. The food was excellent, the conversation flowing easily from topic to topic. Marcus found himself seated across from Judith, and while they did not speak directly much, he was acutely aware of her presence, the way she laughed at Mrs. Patterson's stories, the graceful movements of her hands as she passed dishes. After the meal, when the older folks had settled into comfortable chairs for coffee, and the afternoon had stretched into that lazy period where anything seemed possible, Marcus found Judith standing by the window, looking out at the street. "It is a nice town," he said, joining her. "It is," she agreed. "When I first came here 3 years ago, I thought I would die of boredom. I was used to Philadelphia, you see. All the noise and activity, the theaters and museums. This seemed like the edge of the world. What changed your mind?" She was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. I realized that I had been looking at it all wrong. It is not about what a place has or does not have. It is about what you bring to it, how you make yourself part of it. She turned to face him, and he was struck again by the depth in her eyes. The bell ringing, caring for the church, those things matter because they are my way of saying this is my home, these are my people. Does that make sense? More than you know, Marcus said softly. I have been drifting for 5 years, telling myself I liked the freedom, but hearing that bell, it made me realize I was just running scared. Scared of what? Of caring about something enough that it could hurt me. My parents are both gone, and when they died, I decided it was easier to keep moving than to risk that kind of pain again. He had not meant to say so much, to reveal so much, but something about Judith made him want to be honest. I understand, she said, and he could tell she truly did. My father died 2 years before I came here. He was a lawyer, very successful, and when he passed, I discovered he had debts I never knew about. Everything had to be sold to satisfy them. I came to live with Aunt Margaret because I had nowhere else to go, no money, no prospects. I felt like such a failure. You are not a failure, Marcus said firmly. Anyone can see that. She smiled, a real smile this time that reached her eyes. Thank you. It took me a long time to believe that myself. They talked for another hour, standing by that window while the afternoon light slowly shifted and changed. Marcus learned that Judith loved to read, that she taught Sunday school to the children, that she had a small garden behind her aunt's house where she grew vegetables and flowers. She learned that Marcus had grown up in Texas, that he had once wanted to be a horse breeder, that he could play the harmonica though he rarely did anymore. When it was finally time to part ways, Marcus walked Judith and her aunt back to their small house at the edge of town. Margaret went inside immediately, but Judith lingered on the porch. "Thank you for the company today," she said. "It was nice to talk to someone new. The pleasure was mine. Maybe if it would not be too forward, I could call on you sometime." Her smile was answer enough. "I would like that. I am usually here in the evenings, after I ring the evening bell." Marcus touched the brim of his hat, then turned and walked back toward the boarding house, his heart lighter than it had been in years. He had come to Lewiston looking for nothing more than a night's rest, but he was beginning to think he might have found something far more valuable. Monday morning arrived cold and clear, and Marcus rode out to the Whitmore ranch as the sun was just beginning to paint the eastern sky pink and gold. The spread was impressive, with good grazing land stretching as far as the eye could see, and a collection of well-maintained buildings that spoke of prosperity and care. Henry Whitmore himself met Marcus at the barn, introducing him to the other hands and the foreman, a grizzled older man named Tom Fletcher, who had been working cattle since before Marcus was born. There were 5 other cowboys besides Marcus, all experienced men who welcomed him with the easy camaraderie of those who understood that they would be depending on each other. The work was hard but satisfying. Marcus spent his days mending fences, moving cattle to fresh grazing, breaking a few young horses that Whitmore wanted trained for ranch work. He fell into bed exhausted each night in the bunkhouse, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that came from honest labor and the knowledge that he was building something. But every evening, no matter what he was doing, he would stop when he heard the church bell ring. The other hands noticed, of course, and there was some good-natured ribbing. "You got religion all of a sudden, Garrett?" one of them asked. "Something like that," Marcus replied, not rising to the bait. Tom Fletcher, who missed nothing, just smiled and said, "Miss Wilson is a fine woman. You could do worse." Marcus returned to town every Saturday afternoon, a practice that Whitmore encouraged. The rancher believed that men who were cooped up on the ranch all week would only cause trouble, So he gave them Saturday afternoon and all of Sunday off, unless there was an emergency. Marcus always went straight to the boarding house to clean up. Then he would call on Judith. They fell into an easy pattern. A walk around town, perhaps stopping at the general store for a sarsaparilla, always ending at the church where she would ring the evening bell while he waited below. Then he would walk her home, and they would sit on her aunt's porch, talking until Margaret would call Judith inside, mindful of propriety. As September gave way to October, Marcus felt himself falling deeper under Judith's spell. She was unlike any woman he had ever known, equally comfortable discussing philosophy and the best way to preserve tomatoes. She had a quiet strength that he admired, a certainty about who she was and what mattered to her. And yet she was not rigid or judgmental. When he told her about his father's drinking, she simply took his hand and said, "That must have been very difficult for you." It was her compassion that undid him, the way she seemed to understand without needing explanations. He found himself telling her things he had never told anyone, and she did the same. She spoke of her loneliness after her father died, of how she had felt adrift in the world until she came to Lewiston and found purpose in serving the church and the community. The bell ringing started almost by accident, she told him one evening in late October as they sat on her porch bundled against the increasing cold. The old man who had been doing it passed away, and Reverend Thomas asked if anyone would take it on. No one volunteered, so I did. I thought it would be temporary, but then I realized how much I loved it. There is something meditative about it, something that centers me. And knowing that people hear it, that maybe it brings them comfort or helps them mark their day, that gives me such joy. "You have brought me more than comfort," Marcus said, then hesitated, wondering if he was moving too fast. But Judith leaned closer, her eyes encouraging, so he continued. "You have given me hope. For the first time in 5 years, I can imagine a future that is not just more of the same. I can imagine a home, a family, a life that matters." "Marcus," she said softly, and there was such tenderness in her voice that his throat tightened. "I have been hoping you would say something like that. I know we have not known each other long, but I feel as if I have been waiting for you. As if every time I rang that bell, I was calling you to me." He kissed her then, gently and carefully, mindful of her aunt just inside the house. It was a sweet kiss, full of promise and restrained passion, and when they drew apart, Judith's eyes were shining. "I need to do this properly," Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. "I need to speak to your aunt, ask her permission to court you officially." "She already knows," Judith said with a soft laugh. "She likes you, Marcus. She told me last week that you were a good man, the kind who would stand by his commitments. She is right about that. I will stand by you, Judith. I promise you that." They sat together in the growing darkness, her hand in his, and Marcus felt something in his chest expand until he thought he might burst with it. This was what he had been missing, what he had been running from. This connection, this belonging, this love that was just beginning but already felt as solid as bedrock. Over the following weeks, Marcus became a regular fixture at Sunday dinners and church services. He and Judith were the subject of much gentle speculation in town, with the general consensus being that they made a fine couple. Mrs. Patterson was particularly pleased, taking credit for bringing them together, though Margaret Wilson disputed this, claiming she had known from the moment she met Marcus that he was the one for her niece. The first snow came in mid-November, transforming Lewiston into a winter wonderland. Work at the ranch slowed somewhat, with the cattle brought in closer, and the focus shifting to maintenance and preparation for the harder weather to come. Marcus threw himself into the work, saving every penny he could. He had a plan forming in his mind, one that required money and courage in equal measure. On a Sunday in early December, after church service and the usual dinner at Mrs. Patterson's, Marcus asked Judith if she would take a walk with him despite the cold. She bundled up in her warmest coat and wrapped a scarf around her neck, and together they walked to the church. The town was quiet, most people inside keeping warm, and their footsteps crunched in the snow. "I love it when it is like this," Judith said, her breath puffing out in white clouds. "Everything feels so clean and peaceful." Marcus led her up the steps and into the church, which was cold but beautiful in the winter light filtering through the windows. He had spoken to Reverend Thomas earlier, getting permission for what he was about to do. "Marcus, what are we doing here?" Judith asked, curious but not alarmed. He took both her hands in his, looking into her eyes with all the love he felt. "Judith Wilson, I came to this town 6 months ago with nothing but a horse and a lot of running away behind me. I heard your bell and it called me home. It called me to you. You have given me something I thought I had lost forever. Hope, purpose, a reason to wake up in the morning excited about the day ahead. I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how much." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket, pulling out a simple gold ring with a small sapphire that had cost him 2 months' wages. "Will you marry me? Will you let me be the man standing beside you, supporting you, loving you for all the days we have?" Judith's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling, that radiant smile that made his heart soar. "Yes. Oh yes, Marcus, I love you too. I have loved you almost from the moment you stepped in to help me with those men. You are good and kind and steady, everything I ever hoped to find. Yes, I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he kissed her, longer and deeper than before, and she kissed him back with equal fervor. When they finally drew apart, both breathing hard, Judith laughed. "We should probably go tell Aunt Margaret before she hears it from someone else." "In a moment," Marcus said, pulling her close again. "Let me just hold you for a moment." They stood there in the empty church, wrapped in each other's arms, and Marcus sent up a silent prayer of thanksgiving. He had been so lost, and now he was found. All because a faithful woman rang a church bell and a wandering cowboy heard his calling. The engagement was announced that evening at supper, to the delight of everyone at Mrs. Patterson's table. Margaret wiped away tears and hugged Marcus, welcoming him officially into the family. Mrs. Patterson declared that the wedding breakfast would be held at the boarding house, and she would hear no arguments about it. The other boarders offered their congratulations, and even the taciturn store clerk cracked a smile. The wedding was set for January, giving them time to prepare properly. Judith wanted to be married in the church she loved so much, and Marcus would have agreed to anything that made her happy. He continued working at the ranch, but Henry Whitmore, hearing of the engagement, made him an offer. "I have been thinking, Garrett. Tom Fletcher wants to retire in the spring, move to California to be near his daughter. I need a new foreman, someone who knows the work and who I can trust. The job is yours if you want it. It comes with a small house on the property, 2 rooms but a good solid structure. Not much, but it would be a place for you and your bride to start." Marcus was stunned. "Mr. Whitmore, I do not know what to say. That is incredibly generous. You have earned it. You are a hard worker, the men respect you, and you have got a good head on your shoulders. Besides, I like the idea of my foreman being a settled man, someone with ties to the community." Whitmore extended his hand. "Do we have a deal?" "Yes, sir. Absolutely, thank you." Marcus could hardly wait to tell Judith. When he rode into town that Saturday, he went straight to her house, barely taking time to clean up first. She met him at the door, laughing at his excitement, and when he told her about the offer, she threw her arms around his neck. "Oh, Marcus, a house. A real house of our own. It is not much," he warned. "Just 2 rooms and pretty simple. It is perfect. We will make it a home together." The weeks before the wedding passed in a flurry of activity. Judith sewed a new dress with help from Helen Montgomery and some of the other ladies in town. Marcus spent his spare time fixing up the little house, repairing the roof, replacing a cracked window, building furniture from wood that Whitmore provided. The other ranch hands pitched in, and soon the house had a table and chairs, a bed frame and shelves for Judith's books. Christmas came, and Marcus gave Judith a beautiful leather-bound journal for her thoughts and a warm woolen shawl. She gave him a hand-knitted sweater and a photograph of herself in a silver frame that he would treasure for the rest of his life. They attended Christmas service together, sitting side by side, and when Judith sang the carols, Marcus thought he had never heard anything more beautiful. Finally, January arrived, and with it the wedding day. The weather cooperated, providing a cold but clear morning that made the snow sparkle like diamonds. The church was full, with what seemed like the entire town turning out to witness the ceremony. Marcus stood at the front with Henry Whitmore serving as his best man, his heart pounding as he waited for Judith to appear. When she came down the aisle on Margaret's arm, wearing her new dress with her hair adorned with small white flowers, Marcus felt his eyes sting with tears. She was so beautiful, but more than that, she was his. This incredible woman had chosen him, had agreed to build a life with him, and he vowed silently that he would spend every day trying to be worthy of that gift. Reverend Thomas performed the ceremony with warmth and joy, speaking of love and commitment, of two people becoming one, of building a life together on the foundation of faith and trust. When it came time for the vows, Marcus spoke his clearly and firmly, meaning every word. "I, Marcus Garrett, take you, Judith Wilson, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you in sickness and in health, in poverty and in wealth, for all the days of my life." Judith's voice shook slightly with emotion, but it was strong and sure. "I, Judith Wilson, take you, Marcus Garrett, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you in sickness and in health, in poverty and in wealth, for all the days of my life." They exchanged rings, simple gold bands that Marcus had purchased with the last of his savings, and then Reverend Thomas pronounced them husband and wife. When Marcus kissed his bride, the church erupted in applause and cheers. The wedding breakfast at Mrs. Patterson's was a joyous affair, with food and laughter and dancing. Someone had brought a fiddle, and Marcus surprised Judith by being a passable dancer, sweeping her around the cleared floor while everyone clapped and stomped their feet. Margaret dabbed at her eyes constantly, torn between joy at her niece's happiness and sadness at the thought of her leaving, though they would only be 5 miles away. As the afternoon wore on and the celebration began to wind down, Marcus and Judith slipped away, riding out to the ranch in a wagon loaded with Judith's belongings. The sun was setting as they arrived at their little house, and Marcus lifted his bride over the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition. The house was cold, but Marcus quickly got a fire going in the small stove while Judith lit the lamps. In the warm glow, they looked at each other, suddenly shy despite the months of courtship. "Mrs. Garrett," Marcus said softly, "I like the sound of that." "So do I," Judith replied, moving into his arms. "So do I." That night, in the privacy of their own home, they came together as husband and wife, their love finding physical expression in tenderness and passion. Afterward, lying in each other's arms with the firelight dancing on the walls, Marcus felt a peace so profound it was almost overwhelming. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. "I love you too," she whispered back. "Thank you for hearing the bell. Thank you for answering its call. Thank you for ringing it, for being faithful, for being you." They fell asleep like that, wrapped together, and when Marcus woke in the morning to find Judith beside him, her face peaceful in sleep, he thanked God for the gift he had been given. Life settled into a rhythm that was both comfortable and exciting. Marcus took over as foreman in the spring when Tom Fletcher departed, and he proved to be as good at managing men as he was at working cattle. The ranch prospered under Whitmore's ownership and Marcus's careful management, and Marcus took pride in being part of something successful and good. Judith continued to ring the church bell faithfully, morning and evening, walking the 5 miles to town and back with a dedication that inspired everyone who knew her. When the weather was bad, Marcus would drive her in the wagon, but most days she insisted on walking, saying it gave her time to think and pray. She also became increasingly involved in the community, teaching Sunday school, organizing charity efforts for families in need, and visiting the sick. Her kindness and genuine care for others made her beloved in Lewiston, and Marcus was proud to be her husband. Their first year of marriage brought challenges, as all first years do. They learned each other's habits and moods, had their first arguments and their first reconciliations, figured out how to balance Marcus's work demands with their life together. But through it all, their love deepened and grew stronger. In the spring of their second year, Judith discovered she was with child. They were both thrilled and terrified, but mostly thrilled. Marcus became even more protective, worrying about Judith walking to town, fussing over her when she looked tired. She tolerated his concern with good humor, though she insisted on continuing to ring the bell for as long as she was able. Finally, in early November, their son was born. They named him Samuel Thomas Garrett, and he was perfect in every way. Marcus held the tiny bundle with shaking hands, overwhelmed by the fierce love and protectiveness that surged through him. This was his son, his and Judith's, a living symbol of their love. "He has your eyes," Judith said weakly from the bed, looking exhausted but radiant. "And your nose," Marcus replied, unable to stop smiling. "He is going to be a heartbreaker." Judith laughed softly. "Let us just hope he is happy and healthy. That is all I want." In the days after Samuel's birth, the community rallied around them with the kind of support that made small towns special. Women brought food and offered to help with washing and cleaning. Henry Whitmore gave Marcus extra time off to be with his family. Reverend Thomas came to bless the baby, and Margaret was a constant presence, helping Judith navigate the challenges of new motherhood. Judith could not walk to town to ring the bell for several weeks, and during that time, Marcus took over the duty. He found a strange comfort in it, understanding more deeply now why it mattered so much to his wife. The steady rhythm was meditative, and the knowledge that people throughout the town were hearing it, marking their days by it, gave him a sense of connection and purpose. When Judith was strong enough, she insisted on returning to her duty, though now she brought Samuel with her in a sling. The sight of her walking to town with the baby nestled against her chest became a familiar one, and people would stop to admire the child and chat with the proud mother. The years passed, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Samuel grew into a sturdy, cheerful boy with his mother's kindness and his father's steady nature. 2 years after his birth, Judith gave birth to a daughter they named Rose Margaret, after the flower Judith loved, and the aunt who had given her a home when she needed one. The little house on the Whitmore ranch became too small, and Marcus spent a summer building an addition with help from the other ranch hands and some men from town. Soon, they had 4 rooms instead of 2, with space for the children and even a small parlor where Judith could entertain guests. Marcus continued to excel as foreman, and when Henry Whitmore passed away in the spring of 1889, his will revealed a stunning surprise. He had left the ranch to Marcus and Judith, recognizing in them the values and work ethic he held dear, and having no children of his own to inherit. The ranch was to be held in trust for Samuel and Rose, but Marcus and Judith would manage it for the rest of their lives. The responsibility was enormous, but Marcus faced it with the same steady determination he brought to everything. With Judith's support and input, he continued to run the ranch successfully, treating the hands fairly and making improvements that increased productivity while caring for the land. Through it all, Judith continued to ring the church bell faithfully. It became a symbol of constancy in a changing world, something people could count on no matter what else was happening. There were times when she was sick or away that others would fill in, but everyone agreed it was never quite the same. There was something special about the way Judith rang that bell, a devotion that came through in every note. On their 10th anniversary, Marcus took Judith back to the church where they had married, where he had proposed, where everything had begun. The children were staying with Margaret for the evening, giving them a rare night alone. "You ever regret it?" Marcus asked as they stood in the quiet church. "Marrying me, leaving behind the possibility of a different life?" Judith looked at him with such love that his heart squeezed. "Never. Not for a single moment. You are everything I could have hoped for, Marcus. You heard my call and you answered it, and together we have built something beautiful. How could I ever regret that?" She took his hand and led him to the bell rope. "Ring it with me." Together, their hands on the rope, they rang the evening bell. The sound echoed across the town and the surrounding plains, a song of faithfulness and love, of promises kept and dreams fulfilled. As the last note faded into the gathering dusk, Marcus pulled his wife close and kissed her, thanking God once again for the gift of her love. The years continued to unfold, bringing more joys and occasional sorrows. Samuel grew into a fine young man, taking after his father in his love of horses and ranching. He started working the ranch alongside Marcus when he was 12, learning the business from the ground up. Rose inherited her mother's compassionate nature and became a teacher, opening a small school on the ranch property for the children of the hands and nearby families. Marcus and Judith grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They faced challenges, droughts that tested the ranch's resources, illnesses that scared them, the normal trials of life, but they faced them together, their partnership growing stronger through adversity. Judith continued to ring the church bell faithfully into her 50s, only stopping when arthritis made it too painful. By then, Rose had taken over the duty, maintaining the tradition her mother had started so many years ago. But Judith still walked to church every Sunday, sitting in the same front pew she had occupied since coming to Lewiston, Marcus by her side. On their 40th anniversary, the town of Lewiston held a celebration in their honor. The church was packed, and person after person stood to speak about how Marcus and Judith had touched their lives. They talked about Marcus's fairness as a boss, his generosity in times of need, his steady leadership. They spoke of Judith's kindness, her tireless work for the community, her devotion to the church, and yes, her faithful ringing of the bell that had become the heartbeat of the town. When it was Marcus's turn to speak, he stood slowly, his hair now silver but his eyes still sharp and clear. He looked at his wife, at their children and grandchildren, at the community that had become his home, and felt emotion swell in his chest. 40 years ago, I rode into this town with nothing, he said, his voice strong despite his age. I was running from pain and loneliness, convinced that moving was better than staying, that freedom was worth more than connection. And then I heard a bell ringing. I heard it, and something in me knew that I had found what I was looking for, even though I had not known I was searching. He reached for Judith's hand, pulling her to her feet beside him. This woman, my wife, taught me what it means to be faithful, not just to a person, though she has been that too, but to a calling, to a community, to the small daily acts that make a life meaningful. She rang that bell every morning and evening for 35 years, not because anyone forced her, but because she believed it mattered. And she was right. It did matter. It called me home. It called this community together. It reminded us all that we are not alone. His voice broke slightly, and Judith squeezed his hand, her own eyes bright with tears. I am the luckiest man alive. I get to spend my life with the woman I love, surrounded by family and friends doing work that matters. And it all started because I heard a bell and had the courage to follow its call. The church erupted in applause, and Marcus sat down, pulling Judith close. She leaned her head on his shoulder, and together they watched as the celebration continued around them, their hearts full of gratitude and love. The years continued their steady march, and Marcus and Judith faced the challenges of aging with the same grace and determination they had brought to everything else. Samuel took over the day-to-day running of the ranch, though Marcus remained involved as an advisor, his years of experience still valuable. Rose's school flourished, and she married a good man from a neighboring ranch, giving Marcus and Judith more grandchildren to spoil. On quiet evenings, Marcus and Judith would sit on their porch, the same one Marcus had built all those years ago, and watch the sun set over the plains. They would talk about their day, their children, their memories, comfortable in the silence between words that comes from decades of companionship. Do you remember the first time we talked? Judith asked one evening in late summer. They were both in their 70s now, their bodies slower but their minds still sharp. You had just run off those drunk men and I thanked you. I remember, Marcus said, his hand finding hers automatically. I thought you were the most beautiful woman I had ever seen. Still do. She laughed, the sound still bright despite her age. You are biased. Absolutely, but that does not make it less true. They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling down for the night. Finally, Judith spoke again. I am glad you heard the bell, Marcus. I am glad you came to Lewiston. So am I, love. So am I. Marcus Garrett passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, with Judith beside him holding his hand. His last words to her were the same ones he had spoken on their wedding day. I love you. The town mourned him deeply, and his funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched. Judith lived for 5 more years after Marcus's death, and though she missed him every day, she found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the ranch they had built together, and in her faith. She returned to ringing the bell one last time. On the 50th anniversary of the day, Marcus first heard it and rode into town. Her hands were gnarled with arthritis, and her movements slow, but she rang it with all the devotion and love she had always brought to the task, and people throughout Lewiston stopped what they were doing to listen and remember. When Judith Wilson Garrett passed away in her sleep at the age of 81, the entire town mourned. They buried her beside Marcus in the churchyard, under a simple headstone that read, She rang the bell faithfully. He heard his calling. Together they found home. Samuel and Rose continued the traditions their parents had built. Samuel ran the ranch with the same fairness and integrity his father had shown, and Rose continued teaching, shaping young minds with patience and care. The bell ringing passed to Rose's daughter, then to her granddaughter, a tradition maintained through the generations. And on quiet evenings, when the bell rang across the plains of Montana, old-timers would tell the story of Marcus Garrett and Judith Wilson. They would speak of a cowboy who heard his calling in the faithful ringing of a church bell, of a woman whose devotion brought a wandering man home, and of a love that transformed two lives and blessed an entire community. It became a legend of sorts, the kind of story that gave people hope and reminded them that faithfulness matters, that small acts of devotion can change the world, and that love, real and true and lasting, is always worth the risk. The ranch prospered for generations, always owned by descendants of Marcus and Judith, always run with the values they had instilled. The church still stood in Lewiston, and the bell still rang morning and evening, its song carrying across the growing town that had once been a small frontier settlement. And though the world changed in ways Marcus and Judith could never have imagined, their love story remained constant, a testament to the power of faithfulness, the importance of answering your calling, and the transformative nature of true love. In the end, it was a simple story. A woman rang a bell. A cowboy heard it. Two lonely souls found each other and built a life of meaning and purpose, touching countless lives along the way. But simple does not mean insignificant. Sometimes the most important stories are the simple ones, the ones that remind us of what truly matters: love, faithfulness, community, and the courage to answer when your calling comes. And so the story of Marcus and Judith lived on, passed down through generations, inspiring young lovers and reminding older couples of the vows they had made. The bell continued to ring, just as Judith had rung it, a song of faithfulness echoing across the Montana plains, calling people home, reminding them they were not alone, and celebrating the enduring power of love that answers when it is called. The legacy they left was not just in property or wealth, though the ranch remained prosperous. It was not just in descendants, though their family tree grew large and strong. Their true legacy was in the example they set, of faithfulness in small things, of love that endured through trials, of the importance of community and connection, and of the transformative power of answering your calling when you hear it. That legacy lived on in every person who heard the story and was inspired to live more faithfully, love more deeply, and listen more carefully for their own calling. And somewhere in whatever lies beyond this life, Marcus and Judith Garrett were together still, their love eternal, their story complete, their faithfulness rewarded beyond measure.